Anxiety doesn't come out of nowhere. More often than not, it stems from the silent weight of having to navigate your own life. Sartre once said that we are condemned to be free, and at first, that might sound paradoxical. But think about it. Every choice you make closes the door to all other possibilities. There are no ready-made scripts, no guarantees, only a series of decisions that shape your path. And it's in this clash between the need to decide and the uncertainty of the future that anguish takes root. This feeling doesn't only appear in life's major decisions, it shows up in the everyday as well. Have you ever noticed how some people spend hours trying to pick a movie, a restaurant, or even something as simple as a cup of coffee? This seemingly trivial struggle reflects something much bigger: the weight of choosing. Freedom isn't just a gift, it's a constant responsibility. And when you refuse to make a decision, you're not avoiding the problem. You're just postponing the inevitable. The most curious thing about anxiety is that it often arises from the search for the perfect choice, as if there were a single, right, and definitive path. But reality doesn't work that way. Life doesn't hand out maps, only directions. And most of the time, relief from this restlessness doesn't come from trying to predict everything, but from accepting that uncertainty is part of the journey. Choosing involves risk, but it's also what allows you to carve your own path instead of waiting for it to reveal itself. Those who seek absolute certainty end up stuck. The fear of making a mistake, of regretting a choice, can lead to paralysis. But perhaps the real mistake is precisely that: not taking action. Anxiety doesn't fade with passivity, it grows. And what if this constant discomfort isn't a sign that something is wrong, but a call for you to finally take control of your life? Deep down, the anguish isn't just about not knowing which path to take. It's about realizing that your destiny is entirely in your hands. And that weight becomes even heavier when existence presents itself as a mystery no one ever taught us how to solve. While some people go through life without questioning much, others feel a lingering emptiness that follows them like a shadow. Sartre described this as the anguish of being in the world without a fixed script. Unlike a clock, which has a clear and defined purpose, human beings must create their own meaning, and that task is far from easy. This weight manifests in different ways. Some people try to fill the void with excessive work. Others seek constant distractions, social media, consumerism, or superficial relationships. But no matter how much they try to avoid it, the question always returns: where is all of this leading me? Dissatisfaction doesn't necessarily come from lacking something. It often arises from the quiet awareness that there could be something more beyond the routine. Living on autopilot might seem comfortable, but it comes at a high price. The more you avoid questioning, the further you drift from an authentic life. The illusion that simply following a pre-made path is enough can be tempting, but sooner or later, reality catches up. Some people realize this after a major loss, a sudden change, or even on an ordinary day when they look back and realize that years have passed without them truly living. Emptiness doesn't mean something is wrong. In fact, it can be an invitation to go beyond the surface and engage with life more deeply. Instead of running from the questions, maybe it's more productive to embrace them. Understanding that existence doesn't require a ready-made meaning, but can instead be built, can transform anguish into momentum. The issue isn't just about finding a purpose, it's about learning to live even without having all the answers. And what if the real source of anguish isn't just the lack of meaning, but the need to deal with the freedom that forces us to create it? Freedom sounds like an appealing ideal, until we realize the weight it carries. Sartre said we are condemned to be free because there is no preordained destiny guiding us. We are entirely responsible for our choices. But every decision we make means leaving other possibilities behind. That's the paradox of freedom. It gives us the power to shape our path, but without any guarantee that we're choosing the best one. Often, this anguish disguises itself as indecision, delaying choices, seeking distractions, or waiting for the right moment. May seem like a way to relieve the pressure, but in reality, it's just another form of escape. Not deciding is already a decision. And when you stay stuck, you're not avoiding uncertainty, you're simply letting circumstances decide for you. Paradoxically, this loss of control can be even more suffocating than any risk you might have taken. This anguish manifests even in the smallest choices of daily life. Deciding on a career, staying in or ending a relationship, or simply understanding what you truly want from life. These are dilemmas no one can solve for you. Freedom places this constant responsibility on our shoulders, which leads many to seek ready-made answers, follow self-proclaimed gurus promising success, or cling to the illusion of a predetermined destiny. But the reality is that there is no instruction manual. For life, every choice comes with consequences, and learning to deal with them is part of the process. The problem isn't freedom itself, it's the difficulty of accepting it without fear. The sooner we understand that making mistakes and changing course are natural parts of the experience, the lighter this burden becomes. This weight intensifies when we recognize the gap between who we are and who we could be. Every human being lives divided between their current reality and their projections of the future. Sartre called this the distinction between being in itself and being for itself. While objects simply exist, human beings are constantly reinventing themselves, striving for improved versions of who they are. This awareness that there is always something beyond the present creates an unease that is hard to ignore. After all, dissatisfaction doesn't just come from what we lack, but from what we imagine we could achieve. This restlessness can drive growth, but it can also fuel persistent frustration. Who hasn't felt like they're falling short of their potential? Like they could have progressed further, prepared better, or achieved something greater? The problem isn't just dissatisfaction itself, it's how we handle it. Some use it as motivation to take action, while others get lost in regret, comparing their lives to idealized versions that never came to be. The real danger is when this comparison turns into a burden. Becoming obsessed with who we could have been can make us forget who we actually are. Some people spend their entire lives trapped in the past, replaying decisions they can no longer change. Others remain paralyzed in the present, always waiting for the perfect moment to act. But time waits for no one. The only way to bridge this gap is to build a path forward, and that path is made of choices and actions, not regrets. The key isn't to eliminate this restlessness, but to use it wisely. You can look at your potential as a constant reminder of everything you haven't achieved, or you can see it as an invitation to keep moving forward. Every small action counts. Every step in the right direction brings you closer to the person you want to become. And if Sartre teaches us anything, it's that identity isn't fixed. We are always in the process of becoming. But if the freedom to be whoever we want fills us with anxiety, what happens when we realize that this same freedom also gives us the power to destroy everything? Fear and anxiety are not the same. Fear arises in the face of a concrete danger, something that can be avoided or confronted. Anxiety, on the other hand, comes from the realization that we are free to do anything, even make choices that could harm us. Sartre compared this feeling to standing at the edge of a cliff. We're not just afraid of falling, we're afraid of the fact that we could, at any moment, throw ourselves off. This awareness is terrifying because it forces us to acknowledge that nothing is stopping us from making destructive decisions. And this feeling isn't limited to major life choices. It appears in much subtler ways in daily life. Have you ever found yourself endlessly scrolling through a catalogue of movies, unable to pick one, or staring at a menu, overwhelmed by too many options? This seemingly trivial discomfort reflects something much deeper. The more possibilities we have, the more responsibility we bear for our choices. What if we make the wrong one? What if we choose something and regret it later? Deep down, it's not just freedom that makes us anxious. It's the realization that we have no one to blame but ourselves. What makes this even more challenging is that many of these decisions don't have a clear right or wrong answer. There is no absolute verdict on which career to pursue, which relationship to maintain, or what lifestyle to adopt. All we can do is make the best choice with the information we have at the time. But for those who crave certainty, this constant uncertainty can be suffocating. And this is where the real problem begins. To escape this anxiety, many people shut down. They let others decide for them. follow pre-made scripts, and settle for safe choices. But does this escape truly protect us? Or does it only lead to a limited existence, one where we never explore who we could become? And as if this overload of choices weren't enough, we face yet another challenge: the fragility of the promises we make to ourselves. Sartre referenced Dostoevsky and his struggle with addiction to illustrate a dilemma we all face: the difficulty of keeping our own commitments. Dostoevsky, addicted to gambling, repeatedly swore to himself that he would never place another bet, yet he always went back. Why? Because deep down, he knew there was nothing truly stopping him. No external force prevented him from breaking his promise. Only he could decide whether to keep his word or not. But what happens when freedom becomes so terrifying that people start running from it, adopting fixed roles just to avoid the burden of choice? Not everyone wants to carry the weight of freedom. Sartre calls this bad faith, when someone convinces themselves that they are nothing more than a label, a fixed role, to avoid the responsibility of change. It's the employee who tells themselves, "I'm just a worker, there's nothing I can do." The person who says, "That's just who I am," to justify toxic behaviors. Or the one who resigns themselves to a fate they never truly chose. Hiding behind a fixed identity is much easier than accepting that we are responsible for who we become. This explains why some people spend their entire lives repeating patterns without ever questioning them. They pursue careers they don't enjoy, stay in unhappy relationships, and live suffocating routines, all because they believe they have no choice. But this belief is a trap. Just because something is difficult to change doesn't mean it's impossible. The problem with bad faith is that it offers temporary comfort, but deep down, those who hide behind it feel a constant unease, a silent signal that something isn't right. And here's the interesting part. Bad faith can be so convincing that even the person practicing it believes it. How many times have you heard someone say, "I'm too old for that," "I'm not a creative person," or "I've never been good with numbers"? These statements might sound harmless, but they reveal a dangerous truth: the refusal to take ownership of one's freedom. When we convince ourselves that we are just a fixed set of traits, we never have to face the responsibility of change. The only way to escape this trap is to admit that we always have a choice. This doesn't mean that change is easy or that we can transform our lives overnight. But recognizing that we are more than the roles we play is already a huge step. If we're unhappy with something, we can take action. If a pattern is limiting us, we can break it. What holds us back isn't reality itself. It's the stories we tell ourselves about it. This illusion also shapes the way we see our own identity. Many people believe in a true self, something fixed and unchangeable, as if they were a closed set of characteristics. But Sartre rejects this idea. He argues that we are not born with a defined identity. We are always in the process of becoming. The belief in a fixed self might be comforting because it removes the pressure to change. But isn't this just an excuse to avoid the discomfort of growth? How many times have you heard phrases like, "That's just the way I am," or "I've never been good at that, so there's no point in trying"? This is a subtle form of bad faith, a way to avoid the weight of transformation. If we believe our identity is static, we don't have to face the effort of learning, failing, and evolving. But this rigidity comes at a high cost. It keeps us trapped in old patterns and prevents us from exploring new possibilities. When we convince ourselves that we already know who we are, we shut the door on everything we could become. The proof is simple. No one stays the same throughout life. Think about who you were 10 years ago. Are your values, tastes, and beliefs still exactly the same? Probably not. But this transformation doesn't happen suddenly. It unfolds gradually, shaped by every experience and decision. The more we cling to the illusion of a fixed identity, the harder it becomes to cope with the inevitable changes of reality. Accepting that we are always changing doesn't mean living without a sense of self. It means understanding that our identity is dynamic. The real problem isn't reinvention. It's refusing to accept that reinvention is happening whether we like it or not. The sooner you allow yourself to flow with change, the less resistance and suffering you will carry. But identity isn't something we build in isolation. Like it or not, we are not entirely autonomous in how we see ourselves. Sartre argues that we discover ourselves through the gaze of others. We are constantly being defined and redefined by how people perceive us. This can be both liberating and suffocating. On one hand, it allows us to grow and adapt. On the other, it can trap us in expectations we never truly chose. After all, how much of who you believe you are was actually decided by you? From childhood, we hear labels that shape the way we see ourselves. You're shy. You're smart. You were never good with numbers. These statements, repeated over time, create a sense of identity that can be hard to question. The problem is that when we blindly accept these labels, we may limit ourselves to a reduced version of who we really are. Even worse, we often start acting according to what others expect from us, rather than what we truly want. This becomes even more obvious when we try to break away from an assigned role. If someone has always been seen as the responsible one in the family or the funny friend, they may feel guilty or face resistance when attempting to change. But the truth is, no one is just one thing. Our identity is not a fixed mold. It's a process in constant motion. The real issue isn't being influenced by others, but failing to recognize that this influence is happening. Understanding this can be a turning point. If we are shaped by the gaze of others, then we can consciously choose which influences to absorb and which to discard. This doesn't mean ignoring all external opinions, but rather filtering what truly makes sense to us. Freedom isn't about eliminating the influence of others. It's about deciding which voices deserve space in the construction of who we want to become. And perhaps that's why the mere presence of others can make us feel so vulnerable. Few things affect us as deeply as the awareness of being watched. Sartre describes this feeling as a shock, a reminder that we are not alone. The moment we realize that others are observing us, we suddenly become characters in our own story, and everything we do seems to carry more weight. Have you ever felt that discomfort when you notice someone looking at you, even when you weren't doing anything wrong? That is the power of the other's gaze. Shame arises when we feel that our image has been exposed in a way we cannot control. It's the fear of being judged, of not meeting expectations, of appearing inadequate. This happens in small, everyday moments, like tripping on the sidewalk or saying something awkward in a conversation, but also in deeper situations, such as expressing emotions or making an unpopular choice. In both cases, shame is born from the feeling of being vulnerable to external judgment. But why does this affect us so much? Because deep down, we all want to be accepted. We want to belong. And in that pursuit, we often shape ourselves according to what we think others expect from us. The problem is that this effort can pull us away from our authenticity. How many times have you avoided doing something you truly wanted because you were afraid of what others might think? What Sartre makes us realize is that this fear of judgment is inevitable, but it can be reframed. The gaze of others can be paralyzing, but it can also be a mirror, an opportunity to understand how we position ourselves in the world. The key is finding a balance between staying true to yourself and recognizing that external perception is part of existence. After all, no one escapes the gaze of others. But that doesn't mean we have to be prisoners to it. And maybe that's why even the most self-assured people still seek validation in some way. If you enjoyed this content, leave a like, drop a comment, and check out the books I recommend in the first pinned comment.